They tried to sell my life to a cruel stranger. I escaped and revealed everything. Now, my mother is sick, begging me to come back. What will I do? Elena's footsteps faltered as she entered her father's study. The familiar scent of old books and polished wood usually comforted her, but today it felt oppressive. A faint rustling sound drew her attention to the edge of the desk, where a manila envelope peeked out from beneath a stack of papers. Her fingers hovered over it, a mix of curiosity and unease twisting in her stomach. Something about its placement felt deliberate, as if it had been waiting for her discovery. Her hands trembled as she pulled the envelope free. The paper inside was thick, embossed with an elegant crest that didn't belong to her family. Carefully, she opened it and unfolded the neatly typed documents. The words jumped out at her. Engagement contract? Her pulse quickened. She scanned the details, and every line made her stomach tighten. She couldn't believe what she was reading. The contract bore the name Damien Cross, a man she had never heard of. Elena's mind raced as she recalled the rumors whispered in the town. Stories of a businessman with a ruthless reputation, a man who crushed anyone who opposed him. Her heart pounded as the reality sank in. Her parents had arranged her life without consulting her, binding her to a man she didn't know, a man who could be dangerous. Her father's handwriting scrawled across the bottom, faintly neat and casual. This is for your future. Honor it. The words made her blood run cold. They were supposed to sound protective, caring, but instead, they felt like a cage snapping shut. Elena's hands shook as she held the paper, and anger mixed with fear bubbled inside her. How could they decide this without her consent? She sank into the chair, gripping the contract tightly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Memories of small betrayals over the years, dismissed opinions, ignored feelings, flashed before her. It all added up. Her parents had always controlled her life under the guise of love. Now, the truth hit her like a storm. Their guidance was really about power, their authority absolute. Elena's mind wandered to Damien Cross. She didn't know his face, his voice, or the weight of his presence, but she felt his shadow looming. The stories, the whispered warnings, the fear in neighbors' eyes, all painted a picture of a man who would not tolerate defiance. She shivered. Marrying him could destroy her. And yet, the contract left her no option, no room to question, no escape. Unless she dared to risk everything, her thoughts drifted to her mother, the woman who had raised her, nurtured her, and supposedly loved her unconditionally. Could her mother really be complicit in something so cruel? Elena's heart twisted with betrayal. The woman who tucked her in at night and kissed her forehead had signed away her freedom as if it were a trivial favor, a business transaction. Pain mingled with disbelief, and she felt tears prick her eyes. She glanced around the study, taking in every detail as if they held answers. The polished desk, the leather-bound books, the small family photos, everything seemed tainted now. The home she had loved felt like a prison. She realized she could no longer trust the walls around her. Elena's heart hardened. She knew she had to act, but fear gnawed at her. One wrong move could alert her parents, and she couldn't afford that. Elena clutched the envelope to her chest, her mind racing with possibilities. Could she run? Could she fight? Could she expose the truth and survive? The answers were uncertain, but one thing was clear. She could not allow herself to be handed over to Damien Cross. Her life was hers to protect, no matter the cost. Determination sparked within her, mingled with fear. Creating a resolve that startled her, she stood, gripping the contract tightly, and whispered to herself, "I will not let them control me." Every instinct screamed for escape, for rebellion, for survival. Elena knew this was just the beginning, the first step down a path of danger, courage, and exposure. The manila envelope, once hidden in shadows, had ignited a fire in her heart. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped toward a future she would fight to claim on her own terms. Elena had been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying the discovery of the engagement contract over and over in her mind. The shadows in her room seemed heavier tonight, pressing in as if they carried the weight of her family's secrets. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner, until a sudden sharp ring of her mother's phone shattered the silence. Curiosity and dread propelled her toward the slightly ajar door. Peeking into the hallway, Elena saw her mother pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Her mother's voice was low, urgent, and tense, laced with warnings that made Elena's stomach twist into knots. "Do you understand what's at stake? She cannot refuse. If she does, you know what happens." Elena froze. The words were unmistakable. Her mother wasn't simply persuading someone, she was threatening, coercing, ensuring that any disobedience would have dire consequences. The casual warmth her mother showed by day had vanished, replaced by something cold, calculated, and terrifying. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She strained to hear the conversation, catching fragments of names, sums of money, and veiled threats. There were mentions of disappearances and ruining everything if she steps out of line. Elena's mind raced, connecting the dots. This wasn't just about the engagement. This was about protecting their hidden dealings, secrets that could destroy everyone if exposed. A wave of fear washed over her. She realized that the stakes were far higher than she had imagined. If she resisted, it wasn't just her freedom at risk. It was her life. And the lives of anyone who might help her could be endangered. The gravity of her parents' manipulations hit her like a punch. Their love had always been conditional, their care a veneer over ruthless control. Elena's hands trembled as she backed silently into her room. She pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering, as her mother's voice grew louder and angrier. "No, do not test me. If she steps out of line, you know what you'll answer for." The phone clicked off, leaving a ringing silence that seemed louder than before. She sank to the floor, clutching her knees. The realization was chilling. Every warning, every subtle command, every advice over the years had been a means of control. Her mother, who had kissed her forehead and wiped her tears, had been a participant in a system of fear designed to bind her. The betrayal cut deeper than any contract ever could. Elena thought of Damien Cross again. This man was only a part of the machinery built to ensnare her. Her parents' ambition, greed, and willingness to manipulate had constructed a trap so carefully that stepping out seemed impossible. And yet, Elena's mind refused to accept defeat. She had to find a way, even if it meant walking through fire. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to run far from the house, far from the people who had betrayed her so completely. But the danger outside the walls was unclear. Her family had connections, reach, and power she could barely comprehend. She had to be smart, careful, and strategic if she wanted to survive. Elena rose slowly, eyes blazing with determination. She would not allow herself to be trapped, threatened, or sold into a life of fear. If her parents' secrets had to be exposed to secure her freedom, she was ready to take the risk. Tonight, she had seen the true depth of their control, and tonight, she knew. Her life depended on her courage, her cunning, and her resolve. Elena spent the next few nights in near total secrecy, moving quietly through the house while her parents believed she slept. She retrieved her laptop and a small notebook she had kept hidden for years, the pages filled with mundane memories, but tonight they became instruments of survival. Every detail of her family's manipulations, threats, and financial dealings needed to be recorded before she could act. She began digging through emails, bank statements, and old contracts left carelessly on her father's desk. Each discovery fueled a mixture of fear and determination. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that her family's power extended far beyond their home. They had influence, money, and dangerous allies. If she left without proof, no one would believe her. Elena knew she couldn't do this alone. There was only one person she could trust, Amina, a childhood friend who had always been loyal and resourceful. Late one night, she whispered through the phone, explaining the situation in urgent, clipped sentences. Amina's voice shook slightly but carried resolve. "I'll help. We'll make sure you vanish, but we must be careful." Together, they created a timeline of actions, each step meticulously planned. Elena could not leave behind a digital trail, yet she needed the evidence preserved. They agreed on encrypted drives, hidden in places no one would think to look. Every piece of information was cross-referenced, every backup doubled. Failure was not an option. One slip could mean disaster. Elena also prepared a new identity, studying details about false passports, untraceable bank accounts, and safe locations. She memorized names, addresses, and stories to explain her existence in a world beyond her family's reach. Sleep became a luxury she could not afford. Each hour awake brought clarity and reinforced her determination. The nights were tense and quiet, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old house. Elena had to move silently, aware that her parents could enter her room at any moment. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every sound a potential threat. Fear sharpened her senses, but it also strengthened her resolve. She would not be trapped no matter the danger. Elena and Amina rehearsed their escape multiple times. They mapped routes, practiced brief interactions to throw off anyone who might notice her absence, and planned contingencies if anyone followed. Every detail was accounted for: transportation, lodging, disguises, even how to appear completely ordinary in public. The plan had to be flawless. As they worked, Elena's mind wandered to Damien Cross. Though he loomed in the shadows of her future, he became less frightening than her own parents' betrayals. At least with him, she had an unknown variable. With her family, she had only deception, manipulation, and control. The contrast made her more determined to succeed in vanishing from their world. Days bled into nights as Elena completed her preparations, each passing moment heightening the tension. She packed essentials in small, unassuming bags: cash, documents, and the encrypted drives. She also left subtle clues that might mislead her parents, small traces suggesting she remained in the house while she made her escape. Every detail was designed to protect her. Finally, the night came. Elena looked around her room one last time, eyes lingering on the walls that had witnessed both her childhood and her betrayal. Her heart raced with fear, but her resolve was unshakable. This was the first night of her new life, the night she would reclaim her freedom, expose the truth, and disappear into a world where she was the master of her own destiny. The night air was heavy, carrying the scent of rain and fear. Elena waited in the shadows, heart pounding, every sound amplified in her ears. The engagement celebration had begun inside the mansion, laughter and music masking her movements. She slipped quietly from her room, each step carefully measured, careful not to betray her escape. She paused at the top of the grand staircase, listening for any signs of the security guards her parents had hired. Faint footsteps echoed from the hall below, and she froze, pressed against the wall. Timing was everything. When the footsteps faded, she darted across the polished floor. Avoiding the creaking boards she knew would betray her presence. Her plan included a hidden side exit used only for maintenance, one she had discovered months ago while exploring the estate. It was narrow, dark, and unassuming, perfect for slipping out unnoticed. She kept to the shadows, eyes scanning constantly for patrols. The risk of discovery was immense, but there was no turning back. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a cleansing wave. Freedom tasted sweet, yet fear clung to her skin. Every shadow seemed a threat. Every sound made her heart leap. She knew her parents' influence reached far beyond the mansion walls, and Damien Cross was a looming, unpredictable danger. She couldn't afford a single misstep. Elena's hands shook as she dialed the number of the journalist she trusted, someone who had once covered local corruption with integrity and courage. Her whispered message was urgent, precise, detailing only enough to convey the danger and the evidence she carried. She arranged a secure meeting, hoping it would be her first step toward exposing the truth without being caught. Footsteps suddenly echoed behind her, sharp and fast. Elena spun, heart in her throat, seeing a security guard rounding the corner. Panic surged, but her months of preparation kicked in. She ducked into the shadows, pressed herself against the brick wall, and waited for the guard to pass. Her breath came in shallow gasps, fear sharpening her focus. The streets were nearly empty, the night cloaking her escape. Elena kept moving, sticking to alleys and side streets she had memorized during reconnaissance trips. Every corner brought a spike of adrenaline. Any familiar face could be a threat, any vehicle could be tracing her. She clutched the hidden drives and documents like lifelines, proof that her courage and planning were not in vain. Finally, she reached the agreed-upon safe house where Amina waited, a figure half hidden in the shadows. Relief washed over her, but she forced herself to stay alert. There was no time to celebrate. The journalist would need her story, the evidence, and Elena's account of her family's dark secrets, all without giving anyone a chance to intercept her. Inside the safe house, Elena handed over the encrypted drives, explaining every detail to Amina. They planned how to contact the journalist securely, how to release the evidence in a way that could not be traced back to her before she disappeared completely. The tension in the room was electric, a mixture of fear, relief, and determination. Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe, staring out the small window at the dark city beyond. She had slipped through the clutches of her family, narrowly avoiding capture, and taken the first step toward exposing the truth. But she knew this was only the beginning. Danger still lurked, and the fight for her freedom and justice was far from over. Elena sat before her laptop, the encrypted drive spread out like a map of betrayal. Every document, every email, every contract she had painstakingly collected was ready to be revealed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. Tonight, the truth would see the light. She began uploading the files to a secure, anonymous server, ensuring each piece of evidence was time-stamped and verifiable. Her hands shook as she typed a carefully crafted summary detailing her parents' manipulation, forced engagement plans, and hidden criminal dealings. Every word was precise, every claim backed by proof. Once everything was uploaded, Elena sent the link to a trusted journalist, someone she knew would handle the story ethically and ensure it went viral. She included a detailed account of her personal experience, the threats she had faced, and the corruption she had uncovered. This wasn't just a story. It was a warning to anyone who thought they could control her life. Within hours, the story began to spread. Social media lit up with shock, outrage, and disbelief. News outlets picked up the exposé, analyzing the documents and corroborating her claims. Her parents' carefully constructed reputation began to crumble in real time, the facade of respectability shattered by indisputable evidence. Elena watched from a safe location as the world reacted. Messages of support poured in from strangers and advocates alike. Fear and adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but it was tempered by satisfaction. Justice, finally, had a voice, and her own story had the power to protect others from similar traps. Her parents, oblivious to her exact location, faced public scrutiny, legal questions, and social condemnation. Elena knew they would try to retaliate, but the meticulous documentation she had prepared left them exposed. Their control over her had ended, and the consequences of their actions were unfolding exactly as she had hoped. The sense of liberation was intoxicating, but cautious. Elena began building a new life under a carefully constructed identity. She moved cities, changed her appearance, and took a job in social work, using her experience to help others escape manipulation and abuse. Every day was a step further from the shadows of her past. Despite the relief and freedom, Elena carried a heavy burden. The act of exposing her family had severed bonds, leaving behind grief and loneliness alongside justice. She struggled with moments of doubt, questioning whether she had done the right thing. But the overwhelming need for survival and truth always outweighed the guilt. As weeks turned into months, Elena's online presence disappeared. She became a ghost to her family, untraceable, while continuing to live a life rooted in helping others. The scandal faded from the headlines, but the lessons, both for her and the public, remained sharp and unforgettable. For the first time in years, Elena felt a profound sense of control. She was no longer a pawn in her family's schemes, no longer threatened by a forced life she never wanted. She had rewritten her story, claiming freedom with courage, strategy, and resilience. Her past was behind her, but the empowerment it brought would shape the rest of her life. Years passed, and Elena's life took root in a quiet city far from the mansion that had once caged her. The streets were unfamiliar, the skyline foreign, yet the anonymity gave her peace. She rented a modest apartment above a small cafe, keeping her world simple and uncluttered. Freedom, once terrifying, now felt like a fragile treasure she protected fiercely. Her work as a social worker gave her purpose. She spent her days helping people trapped in abusive relationships and manipulative systems. Every story she encountered mirrored pieces of her own past. Each time she helped someone escape, she felt a surge of satisfaction and hope, a way of balancing the guilt she carried for leaving her family exposed. Despite the calm of her new life, Elena could not completely silence the echoes of her past. Memories of her parents, the threats, and the exposure haunted her quietly. She wrestled with lingering guilt, wondering if they had suffered beyond what she had anticipated. Sleep sometimes eluded her, replaced by the weight of moral questions she could not answer. She kept in touch with Amina, who remained her only connection to the world she had left behind. They shared occasional updates about life, carefully avoiding any traceable digital communication. Amina reminded her that survival often meant leaving some things unresolved, but Elena struggled to reconcile her compassion with the hard necessity of her actions. The city offered a cloak of invisibility, but Elena was always vigilant. She changed her routines frequently, avoided familiar patterns, and carefully monitored the small digital footprint she left behind. Every stranger could be a threat, every glance a potential recognition. Freedom had come at a price, constant awareness and cautious isolation. Elena occasionally reflected on her parents' lives after the exposé. Public scandal had stripped them of their power, and legal investigations had followed. She could not help but feel conflicted, relief that justice was served, mingled with sorrow for the people they had once been. She realized that survival required difficult choices, and forgiveness was complicated. At work, Elena became known for her determination and empathy. She guided victims through bureaucratic obstacles, offered shelter options, and helped them find legal aid. Each success, each life she touched, was a reaffirmation that her escape had purpose beyond her own survival. The shadows of the past fueled her dedication rather than paralyzing her, even in solitude. Elena found small joys: the morning sun on her balcony, coffee with friends she trusted, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on her own terms. These moments reminded her that freedom, though fragile, was worth every risk she had taken. She clung to them like lifelines, small reminders that she had chosen the right path. Yet, the emotional scars lingered. Elena wrestled with the idea that her parents, despite everything, were still family. The memories of childhood warmth clashed violently with betrayal and fear. She often pondered whether she could ever fully forgive, or whether some bonds, once broken, could never be restored. As she walked home from work one evening, Elena felt the weight of both freedom and loss. Her past would always be a shadow, but it no longer controlled her. She had survived, adapted, and even thrived. In helping others escape abuse, she found redemption and purpose, forging a life that was truly her own, even if the ghosts of her family occasionally whispered through the shadows. Elena's morning began like any other, sunlight spilling across her small apartment. The familiar hum of the city outside was comforting, but that peace shattered the moment she opened her mailbox. A plain envelope, unfamiliar handwriting, and a seal she thought she would never see again. Her hands froze as recognition struck. Her mother's script, unmistakable. She hesitated, heart hammering. Part of her wanted to tear it up immediately, to deny any power her mother still held over her. Yet curiosity, and an odd sense of obligation, pulled her fingers to break the seal. Inside, the words were scrawled in urgency and desperation, a plea for forgiveness that made her stomach twist. "Elena, I am sick, and time is running out. I need you. I know I have wronged you, but we are family. Please come back. Please let me see you." The simplicity of the sentence belied the weight behind it. Elena's eyes blurred with conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, and the faintest stirrings of compassion. She sank into her chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Could she believe this? After years of betrayal, manipulation, and exposure, could her mother's words be genuine? Or was this another trap, another attempt to draw her back under control? Elena's mind raced with every memory, every scar, every danger she had narrowly escaped. The letter continued, recounting memories of Elena's childhood, claiming nostalgia and regret. Her mother painted herself as a victim of circumstances, insisting that her illness had forced her to reflect on the past. The words were designed to tug at Elena's heart, to exploit the complicated bond between mother and daughter. Elena paced the apartment, letter clutched tightly. She felt the familiar tug of family loyalty, the voice in her head whispering that blood might still matter. But another voice, stronger and insistent, reminded her of the years of abuse, the contracts, the threats, and the exposure that had saved her life. Trust could not be given lightly. She debated contacting Amina, needing counsel, needing a second perspective. Could she risk being drawn into her mother's world again? Amina's voice on the phone was firm, unwavering. "You've survived. You're safe. You decide the terms, but don't let guilt control you." Elena nodded silently, understanding that caution would have to guide her next steps. Despite the doubts, Elena's heart ached. The idea of a dying mother, alone and pleading, stirred emotions she thought she had buried. She couldn't deny the complexity of their relationship. Love intertwined with betrayal, fear tangled with nostalgia. Each line of the letter reminded her of the humanity she once knew. Finally, she set the letter on the table, reading it over and over. The choice was hers. She could ignore the plea, remain in the shadows she had fought to build, or she could respond carefully on her own terms. The decision weighed heavily, blending morality, survival, and lingering familial bonds into an impossible puzzle. Elena exhaled, resolve hardening. She would decide, but only after careful consideration. No instinct, no pressure, and no manipulation would force her. She had survived before, and she would survive again. But this time, the stakes were different. This was not only about freedom, but about the fragile, complicated thread of family that still lingered, asking whether it could ever be repaired. Elena arrived at the small, dimly lit hospital room, her heart heavy with anticipation and dread. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled her senses, but the sight of her mother frail and hooked to monitors made her stomach twist. Time had aged her mother, softening her once authoritative presence into something fragile and vulnerable. Her mother's eyes lit up the moment she saw Elena, a mixture of relief and desperation flooding her expression. "You came," she whispered, voice trembling. The words carried hope, guilt, and fear, but Elena felt the old anger rising first, sharp and bitter. Years of manipulation surged back in a single, overwhelming wave. Elena's gaze swept the room. Her father was absent, nowhere in sight. A relief, yet a reminder of the power he had once wielded over her life. The absence made the confrontation slightly less dangerous, but it did not make it easier. Memories of contracts, threats, and public shame clung to Elena like shadows. Her mother reached out, weak and trembling, a silent plea in her gesture. Elena pulled back instinctively, heart clashing with morality. She had fought too hard for freedom to let nostalgia or guilt cloud her judgment. Yet, seeing her mother in such a vulnerable state stirred emotions she had thought long buried. Words hung between them, heavy and unsaid. Elena finally spoke, her voice firm but low. "Why now? After everything? After years of lies and threats?" Her mother swallowed hard, tears brimming, and tried to explain, insisting that illness and reflection had opened her eyes to past wrongs. The room was tense, each silence punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Elena wrestled with conflicting feelings: anger for the betrayal she had endured, sorrow for the frailty of the woman before her, and a lingering pull of familial duty she couldn't ignore. Every heartbeat was a war between past and present. Her mother's voice wavered as she recounted memories of Elena's childhood, moments of love and protection she claimed had been real, despite the manipulation. Elena listened, torn between belief and skepticism. Every word was a test, every story a plea for forgiveness that threatened to undo the steel she had built around her heart. Elena took a deep breath, grounding herself. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the frightened girl trapped by contracts and threats. She was the survivor, the exposer, the one who held the moral and emotional leverage. Yet even with control, compassion tugged at her, complicated by the fragile figure before her. Finally, Elena sat down, still distant but willing to engage. She asked questions, demanded honesty, and refused excuses. Her mother answered, faltering at times, but truth surfaced between the half-truths. In that room, years of fear, anger, and betrayal met the tentative possibility of understanding, though forgiveness remained unspoken. When the visit ended, Elena left with a heavy heart, knowing she had witnessed desperation and perhaps regret, but not absolution. The confrontation had brought clarity. Her mother was frail, human, and flawed, but Elena's freedom, boundaries, and judgment remained intact. She had faced the past and survived again, stronger, wary, and unshakably herself. Elena stood at the threshold of her mother's apartment, the letter trembling in her hand. Her mother's plea was simple yet devastating. "Take me in. Let me spend my last days with you. Family comes first." The words echoed through Elena's mind, tangled with memories of manipulation, threats, and betrayal. Compassion warred with anger in a battle that left her heart pounding. Her mind replayed the years of abuse, the contracts, the threats, and the public scandal that had exposed her parents' corruption. Could she risk reopening that chapter, even for compassion? Every instinct screamed to protect herself, to maintain the life she had fought to build. Yet the pull of blood ties tugged at her, insistent and complicated. Amina's voice rang in her mind. "You choose your own boundaries. Elena, protect yourself first." Elena had trusted Amina for years, but this was different. This was family, a fragile figure who once wielded enormous control over her life. Could she reconcile the desire to protect with the lessons she had learned from betrayal? The secrets Elena began to uncover shocked her. Hidden letters, old photographs, and whispered confessions revealed that her mother had not acted entirely of her own volition. Coercion, fear of her husband, and manipulation from powerful associates had guided some of the cruel decisions that had shaped Elena's past. This revelation complicated her moral calculus. If her mother had been trapped in her own web of fear, perhaps some measure of compassion was justified. Elena felt a flicker of understanding, but anger remained, a persistent reminder of the suffering she had endured. Could understanding coexist with accountability? Elena spent hours reviewing the evidence, weighing it against her own experiences. She realized that compassion did not mean blind forgiveness, and care did not require submission. Protecting someone's final days did not mean surrendering her autonomy or exposing herself to manipulation once more. Her mother's health worsened, each letter and call becoming more desperate. Elena felt the emotional weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She wanted to act from a place of control and clarity, not obligation or guilt. Every step she took required caution as she balanced empathy with the hard lessons of her past. She drafted a plan: limited contact, careful boundaries, and controlled caregiving. Elena would offer care without becoming vulnerable to manipulation. She realized that compassion could coexist with caution, and that love did not require sacrificing the safety she had built for herself. Elena's resolve strengthened. She would not let her mother's pleas coerce her into a position of fear again. Instead, she would act on her own terms, guided by ethics, empathy, and self-preservation. The moral crossroads was not about choosing between love and hate. It was about defining what care could look like without losing herself. Finally, she made her choice. Elena would care for her mother in her final days, but under strict boundaries. She would maintain autonomy, enforce limits, and ensure safety while extending measured compassion. In doing so, she honored both her moral instincts and the lessons learned from years of betrayal, forging a path where empathy and strength could coexist. Elena arrived at her mother's apartment with a sense of quiet resolve. The room smelled faintly of medicine and old wood, yet for the first time, Elena felt no fear, only clarity. She had made her decision. She would help, but on her terms. Compassion would guide her actions, not guilt or obligation. Her mother looked up, frail and weary, eyes wide with hope. Elena knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on hers. "I'm here to care for you," she said firmly, "but nothing from the past can hurt me again. This is my rule." Relief and surprise flickered across her mother's face, but Elena remained steadfast. Days passed with careful routines. Elena administered medicine, ensured meals were ready, and kept her mother company, listening to old stories and memories she had long ignored. Compassion existed here, but control remained firmly in Elena's hands. Boundaries were clear, and neither would cross them. Her mother occasionally tried to manipulate or guilt her, slipping old habits into conversation. Elena responded calmly, redirecting and enforcing limits. She realized that care without accountability was meaningless. She could help without surrendering her autonomy or repeating the patterns of her past. At night, Elena reflected on her journey. She thought of the contracts, the threats, the exposure, and the years she had spent building a life in the shadows. Each choice had led her here, a place where she could act with morality, empathy, and strength, all balanced by wisdom born of survival. The moral weight of the past lingered, but it no longer dictated her life. Elena had chosen justice and compassion over revenge and indifference. She understood that helping her mother did not erase the betrayal, but reframed it. Care was no longer control. Forgiveness was no longer surrender, and freedom was fully hers. When her mother eventually grew weaker, Elena ensured her comfort and dignity. Medical care, meals, and attention were given, yet her mother could no longer manipulate or harm anyone. Elena had crafted a safe space, one that allowed compassion to exist without danger or compromise. Finally, the day came when Elena left the apartment, the weight of years and decisions settling in her chest. She walked away knowing she had honored both her own life and her mother's fragile humanity. Boundaries had been maintained, care had been given, and control rested where it belonged. With her, Elena returned to the life she had built in the city, stronger and wiser. The shadows of her past no longer loomed with fear, only with lessons learned. She felt the clarity of someone who had survived manipulation, exposure, and betrayal, and had emerged unbroken, in full command of her destiny. As she stepped onto the busy street, sunlight illuminating her path, Elena finally felt the weight lift completely. Freedom, justice, and compassion had been balanced in her choices. She was free, not just from her parents or their schemes, but free to live a life defined by her own courage, wisdom, and moral authority.